The raven came at dusk, its black wings slicing through the air like a blade through snow. Ned Stark stood on the balcony of Winterfell, the chill biting at his bones even through the thick fur cloak around his shoulders. He had grown used to the cold over the years, but something about that evening made the air feel different, ominous. Maester Luwin handed him the scroll with a hesitant glance, and Ned read it in silence, his eyes narrowing with every word. His hands clenched the parchment tight as the truth unfolded before him. It wasn't just another message from the south. It was a warning. Catelyn's old friend, a whisperer from Riverrun, had uncovered whispers of betrayal words traded in shadowed corners between the Freys and the Lannisters. A massacre was being planned, and his son, Robb, was walking straight into it. By the time Ned looked up from the letter, his face was pale with fury and fear. He didn't say a word at first. He turned and walked straight to the great hall where the lords of the north were gathered. It wasn't the time for mourning past wrongs, not the time to dwell on his own near-death, nor on the lies spun in King's Landing. It was time to act. "I need riders," Ned said firmly, his voice cutting through the hall like a blade. 10 of them, fast and silent. Send them to Robb. Tell him to pull back. Do not go to the twins. The Freys are planning treachery. The hall went quiet. Then Seer Roderick spoke. "Is this certain, my lord?" "As certain as I live," Ned replied. "If he walks through those gates, he will not walk out." Ned had returned to the north under the protection of a rare alliance between northern lords and dissident bannermen of the Vale, forged after his near execution at Belar's Sept. With King Robert's death and Joffrey's ascension, the realm had fractured into war. But the gods had granted him one grace escape, and with it, time. He didn't waste it. Robb had already won his early battles. The young wolf, they called him. But he was young, trusting, and too noble-hearted. Ned knew that honor, when blind, was a dagger pointed inward. By the time the riders reached Robb's camp, it was nearly too late. The banners were already moving toward the twins, but the message sealed with the Stark, direwolf, and carrying his father's warnings. Everything. Catelyn read the letter twice before she believed it. Her hands shook as she passed it to Robb. "Your father... he's alive. And he says we cannot trust the Freys." Robb stared at the parchment, lips tight. Why would they betray us now? "We made peace. I apologized. We offered Edmure to marry their daughter. We have an alliance." Catelyn's voice cracked. "Alliances mean nothing to a man who counts coin and pride over honor. Walder Frey has always waited for revenge." Robb stepped away, his fists clenched at his sides. The tent was silent except for the crackle of the brazier. Outside, thousands of men waited for orders. That night, Robb Stark changed course. He did not cross the twins. Instead, he turned his army east toward Seagard, where he would regroup with the Mallisters. He sent ravens to the Riverlords, to the Vale, and most of all to Winterfell, when the Freys opened their gates expecting celebration and submission. They found only silence. No banners, no wedding, no feast. Lord Walder Frey flew into a rage, but before he could act, ravens circled the north with Ned Stark's decree. "The Freys are not to be trusted. They broke bread with us and planned murder." Ned knew that stopping the Red Wedding wouldn't end the war, but it would save his son, and that was enough for now. But the Lannisters were not fools. Tywin had gambled on the Red Wedding too. Break the North's spirit. Now, with that move blocked, he would strike elsewhere and harder. Far to the south, in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister stared at a letter of her own. Her mouth twisted in a smile as she passed it to her father. "He's alive," she said, with venom in her voice. "Eddard Stark lives, and now the game changes." Tywin Lannister didn't blink. He poured himself a cup of wine and stared out the window into the night. "Then we shall have to kill him properly this time." The wind howled through the trees as Ned Stark rode through the Wolfswood with a dozen men at his back. He hadn't ridden this hard in years. The snow was beginning to fall again, light at first, but growing heavier with each passing hour. He wasn't a young man anymore. His joints reminded him of that, but something deeper pushed him forward. Fear and love. He needed to reach Robb himself. Sending riders wasn't enough. He had to stand before his son, look him in the eye, and ensure he understood just how dangerous the game had become. The war had already taken so much. His friend Robert was dead. His daughter Sansa was still trapped in King's Landing as far as he knew, and little Arya was lost to the winds. He had no illusions that peace could be brokered easily, but saving Robb was a beginning. And if the North still had its king and its honor, then the rest could be rebuilt. By the time Ned reached the Mallister stronghold near Seaguard, he saw the banners flying high Stark wolves, Tully Trout, and the silver eagle of House Mallister. Robb was alive, and he was waiting. The reunion was quiet. No tears, no shouts, just a long embrace between father and son, the kind that needed no words. Robb looked older, harder. War had carved something into him, but Ned saw the boy beneath it, still trying to be a man too quickly. "You should have sent words sooner," Robb muttered, once they were alone in the war tent. "I thought you were dead." "I nearly was," Ned said grimly, "but it seems the gods or something else had other plans." He spread out the map on the table, pointing to the twins. Walder Frey never intended peace. The Lannisters offered him gold, titles, a path to high-born legitimacy. They promised him everything if he cut the wolf's throat under his roof. This wasn't just treachery, it was a strategy. Robb stared down at the map, jaw clenched. "So now what? We march on the twins?" "Not yet," Ned replied. "We gather the North. We make sure every bannerman understands what nearly happened. We turn the Riverlands into our shield, and we strike only when we know we can win. This war has become a chessboard, and Tywin Lannister plays without mercy." At that moment, Catelyn entered. Her face lit up briefly at the sight of her husband, but it was quickly replaced by worry. "You saved him," she said softly, "but the Lannisters won't rest now. They'll come for you, for all of us." "They already have," Ned said, "and they'll keep coming until we bury them in the snows of the North or burn there. Cities to ash," but not everyone was pleased. That evening, around the war table, voices clashed. Some lords, like Great John Umber and Lord Karstark, demanded immediate retaliation. Others urged caution. Lord Rickard Karstark banged a fist on the table. "We cannot let this go unanswered. The Freys planned to slit our throats while dancing in their halls. Are we to wait while Tywin sharpens his next dagger?" "We don't have the numbers," Ned countered. "You want to march on the twins? You'll be caught between the Freys and the Lannisters, and they'll bleed you dry." "We are Starks," Karstark growled. "Not cowards hiding in towers." "We are Starks," Ned snapped, "because we choose when and how we fight, not because we throw away our lives for vengeance." The room went silent. That night, Ned met with Robb and Catelyn once more. "In private, there's another danger," he said grimly. "Roose Bolton Catelyn frowned. Ruse, he's sworn. To rob. And yet, he sends his bastard to flay men in the north, and he lingers too long in Harrenhal. There are whispers, always whispers. I never trusted the Boltons, Robb muttered. He offers counsel, but it always leans toward blood and fear. Keep him close, Ned advised, but never let your guard down. If Walder Frey was willing to betray us for gold, Roose may not be far behind. Meanwhile, far to the south, Tywin Lannister had already begun to move his pieces. The failed Red Wedding had changed everything. The North was not shattered. The Starks lived. And worst of Eddard Stark was back. In King's Landing, the small council argued about their next move. Stannis holds Dragonstone, the Starks hold the North, Cersei hissed, and the Tyrells wait like vultures. We are surrounded. Tywin didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the painted table in silence. Send ravens to Roose Bolton, he said finally. It's time he proves where his loyalty lies. And with that, a darker plot began to stir, one even bloodier than the wedding that never was. Dawn broke over Seaguard with the cries of gulls and the smell of salt in the air. Ned stood by the ramparts, watching the sun rise. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to hope. Robb had survived the trap. The North still had. A king, but hope was a fragile thing in war. He had learned that too many times. Inside the castle, Robb met with his council again. His face was calm, but his voice carried steel. We ride for Riverrun. Lord Edmure must be warned. House Tully stands with us, but they're vulnerable. The Freys won't stay quiet forever. And we have another problem, Roose Bolton. The name made Catelyn's eyes darken. He's a snake, always has been. Ned nodded. He'll be watching, waiting. If we leave him room to act, he'll strike. We can't take him head on yet, but we can watch him. Send scouts, trusted men, no ravens. We can't risk him knowing, Robb agreed, dispatching a group of his most loyal men. Among them was Mage Mormont, a stern woman with a keen mind, and Galbart Glover, who had never trusted Bolton from the start. Meanwhile, in the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton received Tywin Lannister's raven. He read the message slowly, his pale eyes gleaming. The words were few, but they said everything. The North must be cut from its root. You will be rewarded well for the head of a wolf. Bolton burned the letter and stared into the fire. He didn't need to reply. Tywin would know what silence meant. But Roose had his own plans, and his bastard, Ramsay, was already working. In the shadows, the Boltons hadn't forgotten the power vacuum Winterfell offered. They had tasted what rebellion felt like during Theon's short, disastrous rule, and now they wanted more. Ramsay, half mad and hungry for recognition, had begun striking small northern villages, disguised as Ironborn or bandits. Confusion was his weapon, and fear his favorite tool. At Seaguard, news arrived by Raven. Winterfell was in flames. Again, Robb stood in silence as he read the scroll. Villages surrounding Winterfell burned. Survivors claim flayed men rode under no banners. Some say Ironborn, others saw men wearing grey cloaks. Ned snatched the message from his son's hands. No Ironborn. That's Bolton's doing. He wants us to doubt, to scatter, to chase shadows. Robb turned to his father. Then what do we do? Ride back north? No, Ned said sharply. That's what he wants. You're king in the north. You can't run from the south every time a spark is lit at home. Let me go. I'll ride north, rally the bannermen, and put out the flames myself." Rob's lips parted, but Catelyn was already shaking her head. "It's too dangerous." "I've spent half my life fighting to protect Winterfell," Ned replied, "and I won't sit idle while another vulture circles it." After a moment of silence, Rob relented. "Take the Mormonts and the Glovers. Leave before nightfall. We'll keep pressing toward River Run." They embraced once more, father and son, to wolves facing storms from both ends of the realm. As Ned rode north again, flanked by hardened warriors and sharp-eyed scouts, he felt the weight of old battles settle on his shoulders. Winterfell had been burned once. It would not be lost again, but he feared what he would find when he arrived. And in the south, in the heart of power, Tyrion Lannister stood by a window in the Red Keep, thinking hard. He had read the reports. The Red Wedding had failed. Eddard Stark lived, and now rumors whispered through the capital like smoke that Tywin was working with Bolton behind closed doors. Tyrion was no fool. "I know your plans, father," he murmured to himself, "and one day they will consume you. But for now," he played the loyal son, the clever fool, the dwarf with no power, just as they expected. That evening, Lord Varys paid him a quiet visit. "You've heard, I presume," Varys said, voice soft as silk. "I hear everything," Tyrion replied. "I hear Eddard Stark cheated death, and the wolf has sharp teeth again." Varys nodded, eyes glinting. "And teeth, my lord, have a way of finding throats." The game had shifted, and this time the North wasn't dying quietly, was baring its fangs. Snow blanketed the King's Road as Ned Stark and his escort made their way north. The landscape had grown colder, harsher, almost as if the land itself sensed the return of war. Every mile they traveled brought them closer to Winterfell, and with it, to the burning wreckage left behind by Bolton's twisted ambition. They passed through villages half buried in snow and smoke. In one, they found children hiding in cellars, their parents flayed and left hanging like butchered animals. The stench was unbearable. One of the scouts vomited behind a tree. Ned stood over the corpses in silence, jaw clenched, eyes dark with rage. "This isn't Ironborn work," Mage Mormont muttered. "This is sadism. This is flaying for sport." "Bolton," Ned growled. "He's trying to provoke us. He wants to break the North from within." At Winterfell's scorched gates, the damage was worse. Ramsay Bolton had struck quickly, with a small force, just enough to leave a scar. Smoke still drifted from the blackened towers. The Godswood had been set alight, though the fire didn't take. Ned rode into the yard and dismounted slowly, staring at the rubble with a heavy heart. The home he had bled for now stood wounded. Once more, but not all was lost. Inside the ruins, a small group of loyal men had survived. They had taken shelter in the crypts, holding out with what little food remained. Among them was old Maester Qyburn, exiled from the citadel, but spared by the North after treating wounded villagers. "They were monsters," Qyburn whispered, voice shaking. "No banners, no mercy. They laughed while they burned our food stores, left a message on the walls." Ned stepped into the great hall and saw it, smeared in blood across the stones. A crown for a corpse, a home for dogs. Mage Mormont spat on the floor. "Ramsay, it has his madness written all over it." "We rebuild," Ned said, cold and clear. "Send word to the Karstarks, the Reeds, and the Tallhearts. Winterfell will not fall, not again." But deep in his bones, Ned knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Roose Bolton wasn't acting alone. No lowly northern lord would dare. defy Robb Stark so openly not, unless he had the backing of something stronger, something wealthier, something like Tywin Lannister. In River Run, Robb Stark stood at the battlements, gazing over the Tully banners. It had been years since he'd walked these halls. He should have felt comforted, but he didn't. His uncle, Edmure, greeted him warmly, but the shadows of war hung over every corridor. And soon, troubling news arrived. A raven from the north, Winterfell, had been attacked. The Bolton bastard responsible. Another raven from the Vale, Littlefinger, was courting allies, sowing quiet chaos in Lysa Arryn's court. And finally, word. From Dorne, they had begun moving spies through the Riverlands, curious about the Starks' resurgence. Robb slammed his fist onto the war table. The whole realm is watching us, waiting for us to fail. Catelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. They expect us to fall apart. We must show them that we won't. But even as she said it, Robb could feel the cracks. His bannermen were growing restless. The Freys were furious and unpredictable. The Karstarks had not responded to recent letters and ruse. Bolton still held Harrenhal in silence. Then came another blow. News arrived that Sansa was to be married to Tyrion Lannister. Robb turned white with fury. They use her as a pawn, he said through gritted teeth. They humiliate our name. My sister, married to their imp. Catelyn's voice was quiet, but firm. They think it weakens you, that it makes you hesitate. I won't, Robb vowed. The next time I march, I will burn their strongholds to the ground. Meanwhile, in Harrenhal, Roose Bolton stood alone in the ruins of the great hall, listening to the echoes of history. Flayed banners hung in silence. His bastard son, Ramsay, knelt before him. They're rebuilding Winterfell, Ramsay hissed. The old wolf rides again. Good, Roose murmured. Let him ride. Let him chase ghosts. We will build our power in the shadows, but the Lannisters want more than delay. They will get what they deserve, Roose replied, cold and calm. But not yet. Patience, my son. Even wolves must sleep eventually. Far away, Tywin Lannister received Roose's raven. He read it carefully. A faint smile touched his lips. The north is not yet broken, but it bleeds. And Tywin knew. If he couldn't kill a wolf with a sword, then he'd bleed it with 1,000 tiny cuts. The sky above Winterfell was grey and heavy, as if the clouds themselves grieved for the north. Ned stood in the godswood once more, the snow-dusted trees whispering like old ghosts. The heart tree had survived the flames, its red leaves scorched, on the edges but not consumed. Like the Stark name, it had endured. Maester Qyburn approached quietly. The ravens have returned. The Tall Hearts and Manderleys have pledged men, the Karstarks. He hesitated. Ned turned. Speak. The Karstarks offer no reply. Silence, my lord. And scouts report strange movements near the Dread Fort. Roose is gathering men, Ned exhaled slowly. He means to move. If not against us, then against Robb. But he couldn't ride again, not yet. Winterfell needed him. The people, what few remained, looked to him not as a soldier, but as the Stark who came home. Children clung to his cloak. Widows asked for justice. Young boys wanted to train for war. It was more than duty, it was survival. And so Ned Stark stayed and rebuilt. Walls were raised again, burnt beams replaced with stone and timber. Food stores replenished. The crypts were repaired with care, as if to honor the dead whose names still carried weight. In the south, though, the game darkened. At King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat alone in the council chamber, letters piled high before him. His face was still, but his mind turned like a whetstone against steel. The North's resistance was now more than just a nuisance, it was a threat. Varys slinked in quietly. "You seem troubled, my lord." Tywin didn't look up. "Tell me, how is it that every time we strike at the Starks, they rise again?" Varys smiled thinly. "Some wolves refuse to die." Tywin finally looked up. "Then we starve them, bleed them, strip away the pillars beneath them." A moment passed. "Begin with the veil," Tywin ordered. "Petyr Baelish knows how to twist Lady Arryn's affections. Let him plant the right thoughts in her head. If we can keep the Eyrie out of the war, or better, turn it, we split the North from its allies." "And the Freys?" Varys asked. Tywin's mouth curled in disgust. "They are rats, gnawing at our scraps. If they can't deliver the Stark's heads, they are of no use to us." Meanwhile, at Riverrun, Robb Stark prepared to march again. The Riverlords had gathered. Tully, Blackwood, Brackeneven, the wary Freys had sent word they were considering new terms. But Robb knew better. "They want me to beg," he said to his mother. "They want me to kneel and offer more gold, more marriages, more titles." Catelyn shook her head. "Don't you give them nothing. You already offered peace." They spat on it. Robb turned to Lord Edmure. "We strike the twins. We take them by force." "No one has taken the twins," Edmure warned. "The river protects them." Robb looked at the map and then to his bannermen. "Then we freeze the river. We wait until winter thickens the water. Then we march over it." Catelyn stared at her son. "You're becoming like your father." Robb didn't smile. "No, I'm becoming what the North needs. We've shown mercy. We've shown honor. Now it's time we show wrath." The room grew quiet. That night, Catelyn sat by the fire, alone, remembering Ned's face when he rode off toward Winterfell. She had spent so many years worrying he was too cold, too rigid. But now, with the realm tearing itself apart, she realized he had been the last steady hand on a fraying rope. And far to the north, Ned received word of Robb's plan. He read the Raven, eyes narrowing at his son's boldness. The twins were not easily taken. The Freys might be cowards, but cornered cowards could kill too many. He turned to Mage Mormont. "It's time I speak to Robb again." In person, but just as he began to prepare for his journey, another raven came. This one was sealed in black wax. The Night's Watch. Ned's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The words inside were few but heavy. "Lord Stark's strange things stir beyond the wall. The dead do not rest. The free folk flee south in numbers not seen before. We request men, food, steel. We request aid. Signed, Lord Commander, Jeor Mormont." Ned stared at the parchment long into the night. He thought of Jon, his boy in black. He thought of the old tales, and he thought of what this war had cost them while a darker, colder storm gathered above. The North had too many enemies. Some wore lion sigils, some carried flaying knives, but some didn't breathe at all. The fire crackled softly in the great hall of Winterfell, but the warmth didn't reach Ned Stark's bones. He sat alone, rereading the black-sealed Raven from the Night's Watch. The words haunted him. "The dead do not rest." It was the kind of line you heard in ghost stories, whispered over ale by tired men in cold inns. But this wasn't a tale, it was a warning. Ned had never doubted the wall's importance. It was part of him, part of his blood. His brother Benjen had gone north and never returned. And now Jon, his quiet, brooding boy, wore the black cloak in his place. He folded the letter and tucked it beneath his cloak. Mage Mormont entered without knocking. More reports from the north. Wildling scouts seen near the last hearth. The Umbers are restless. They say something's coming, something unnatural. Ned looked up, his voice low. I believe them. Mormont frowned. We fight Freys and Boltons, and now shadows from old wives' tales. They're not tales anymore, Ned said firmly. I want 30 men sent to the wall. Steel, food. Blacksmiths. Tell them how Stark remembers its vows. She nodded and left. But the decision weighed heavy on him. Winterfell was still weak, the north fractured. If he sent men to the wall, he'd be exposed. But if he didn't, if those dead things were real, no war with Lannisters or Boltons would matter. Meanwhile, in River Run, Robb stood on the frozen banks of the Red Fork, watching as the river slowly turned to ice. His plan was working. Scouts had found shallow bends where the waters froze thick and hard. The Freys hadn't yet reinforced those areas. Arrogance or stupidity, it didn't matter. Lord Blackwood stood beside him. The twins aren't ready. Not for a winter siege. If we strike fast and cut their bridge, they'll be trapped. Robb nodded. No feast, no parley, no more chances. But trouble stirred even among his own. Lord Karstark still hadn't responded, and now word reached them that he'd begun mustering men without Robb's banner. The Boltons had gone quiet. Too quiet. Catelyn confronted her son that evening. You're surrounded by snakes. They smile, they nod, and they wait. One of them will strike while you look away. Robb stared into the fire. Then I'll keep my sword drawn. You can't fight every enemy alone, she whispered. You need your father. Robb sighed. I need more than that. I need the North Hole again. Far to the east, in Harrenhal, Roose Bolton read another letter from Tywin. The message was simple. You promised us the wolf's head. Deliver. Roose sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Ramsay, perched nearby, toyed with a bone knife. I could ride for River Run, Ramsay said with a wicked smile. Cut the young wolf's throat myself. No one would stop me. Roose didn't respond. His eyes were on the map. No, he said at last. Not yet. Let them turn their backs. First, let them think Winterfell is secure. Then, ... we end the Starks for good. Back in Winterfell, a surprise visitor arrived under cover of night. A small hooded figure, escorted by northern guards. Ned came down from his chambers. Curious, and then he froze. Arya, his daughter, looked older, tired, thinner, but it was her. The fire in her eyes, the way she held herself like a blade always halfway drawn. Arya, he whispered again, stepping forward. How did you? She hugged him without a word. For a long time, neither of them moved. Later that night, she sat with him near the hearth, speaking in a voice that was almost too calm for her age. I escaped the Lannisters, travelled with men who wore other names, saw kings die, saw monsters wear crowns, and I saw what happens when people like Walder Frey are left alive. Ned stared at her, trying to understand the things she wasn't saying. I'm not a little girl anymore, father. I can see that Arya's hands tightened around her cup. You need to stop playing their game. The Boltons, the Freys, the Lannisters, they don't fear your honor. They use it. Ned sighed. So what do you want me to do? Flay them? Poison their wine? Burn their homes? If that's what it takes, she said, eyes hard. But he couldn't give her that answer. Not yet. He was still Ned Stark, still holding on to a code that felt older than the gods themselves. Later that night, as the fires dimmed and Winterfell slept, Arya stood in the crypts, staring at the stone faces of long-dead Starks. "I'll protect them," she whispered, "all of them." And in the shadows, something stirred. A wind that didn't belong. A breath colder than ice. Beyond the wall, the dead were walking, and the War of Thrones had blinded men to the true enemy, marching south with eyes like blue fire. The snows thickened as Arya walked through the empty corridors of Winterfell, the halls humming with memories, every creak in the stone, every echo of her boots against the floors brought ghosts, her brothers sparring in the yard, her mother's voice calling from the steps, her own laughter chasing through corridors she hadn't seen in years. But the girl who once played with wooden swords was long gone. That Arya had died somewhere along the king. What remained was a shadow sharp, silent and dangerous in the great hall. She found Ned poring over a map with Mage Mormont and a cluster of northern lords. He didn't look up until she spoke. "They'll betray you," she said simply. The room went silent. Ned didn't scold her, didn't dismiss her. He only asked, "Who?" "Karstarks, Boltons, maybe even some Frey dogs you don't know about yet. They smell weakness. You rebuild walls, but they want to burn what's left." Mage frowned. "The girl speaks boldly. She speaks the truth," Ned said after a pause. "The north is colder than ever, and the wolves are not all loyal." One of the lords grunted. "What would you have us do? Execute Lord Karstark on suspicion?" Arya's gaze didn't flinch. "I'd slit his throat in his sleep if I thought it'd save my family." Ned turned sharply. "That is not how we do things, Arya." Her jaw clenched. "It's how they do things, and that's why they win." That night, Ned stood alone in the Godswood once more. He could feel the weight of two wars, now one political, fought with ravens and swords, and another coming from the cold, where names and banners meant nothing at all. He was a man out of time. The realm he believed in had cracked like ice, and his children, Robb, Arya, even Jon, were hardening into soldiers far younger than he'd ever wished. Suddenly, the Godswood whispered again, not with wind, but wings. A raven landed on the stone beside him, black wax. Another letter from the wall. This one wasn't signed by Jor, Mormont. It was from Jon. "Father, the wall is falling. The free folk are not our enemy. We face things beyond death. The Night's Watch cannot hold. Send help, anything. If the wall falls, so will the world." Ned read the words twice, then lowered the parchment. This wasn't politics. This wasn't about Thrones. This was something older, something evil. He summoned Mage and the others immediately. "The war with the South waits," he declared. "We marched for the wall now." She balked. "In winter," Ned's voice hardened. "If we don't, we'll have no Winterfell left to defend, no north, nothing." Some protested. Some called it madness. But a few those who remembered the old stories nodded grimly. And while they prepared for the march, trouble grew in Riverrun. Robb stood before the gates of the twins, his army poised across the frozen river. The Freys jeered from their walls, confident in their castle's defense. But they hadn't expected the river to freeze this fast. They hadn't expected Robb to ride on ice. That morning, steel clashed as Robb's forces stormed the outer perimeter. Within hours, the first gate fell. Freys tried to flee across the bridge, but the Mallisters had already cut off escape. Arrows rained, fires broke out. Screams filled the halls where a wedding massacre was once meant to happen. Rob found Walder Frey in his dining hall, slouched in a high-backed chair, surrounded by sons too cowardly to die with honor. Walder didn't even rise. "I should have slit your throat when I had the chance." Rob didn't flinch. "You never had the chance." And then, without ceremony, he drove his sword through the old man's chest. When it was done, Rob turned to his men. "No more weddings, no more feasts. This house is done." He ordered the twins burned, back in King's Landing. Word arrived on a chill breeze. Varys delivered the news to Tywin personally. "The twins have fallen. Walder Frey is dead. The Starks are not dying." Tywin's knuckles whitened on the rim of his goblet. "They think themselves victorious," he said quietly. "Let them feel it. Let them feel secure. And then we strike from where they least expect." But Varys didn't respond. He was already thinking far ahead, beyond thrones, beyond wars of houses. He had heard rumors of fire and ice, of shadows in the north that even Tywin Lannister could not bribe. And in the frost-covered north, Ned Stark looked once more to the wall, to the son who wasn't truly his, but who might be the key to everything. The march began the next morning, not to conquer, but to defend. The wolves were riding north to meet the dead. The winds howled as they rode north. Snow lashed their faces, and the sky remained a cold, colorless sheet. Ned Stark led a column of 200, the best Winterfell could spare without collapsing. Mage Mormont at his side, a banner of the direwolf held high through the storm. Behind them, hardened men of the North rode in grim silence. They were not marching for glory, or conquest, or vengeance. They were riding toward death by the time they reached Castle Black. The wall stood like a frozen mountain above them, but something was wrong. No horns sounded, no men on the ramparts, only silence. Ned dismounted without a word and climbed the outer steps with Mage at the top. He finally saw what Jon's letter had warned of. The gates had been smashed. Blood stained the snow in frozen splatters. Scorch marks blackened the wooden barricades, and beyond the gate, footprints, thousands of them, bare, rotten, inhuman. "The wall has been breached," Mage whispered. They descended into the castle, finding only the wounded and the dead. Samwell, Tarly, battered and pale, met them at the entrance to the armory, holding a dragon-glass dagger with trembling hands. "Ned Stark." Sam's voice cracked. Ned rushed forward. "Where's Jon?" Sam's eyes welled with tears. "He went north. He took what was left of the watch to stop them. We tried to hold, but there were too many." Mage turned pale. "The Night King." Sam nodded slowly. "He rides with them, not just whites now. He has giants, ice-born beasts." He turned, a bear into something unholy. Ned felt the weight of 100 regrets on his shoulders. He had marched his men to the brink of the world, but it still wasn't enough. "Where did Jon go?" "Eastwatch," Sam said. "He's trying to delay them before they reach the north. He means to hold them at the sea. Without rest, without sleep." Ned led his men eastward, far south, at River Run. Robb Stark stood before a bonfire that roared higher than the castle walls. Frey banners burned. The twins were rubble. The River Lords had knelt once more, but victory felt hollow. He received the Raven from Winterfell the same day the last Frey daughter was dragged out of hiding. "The wall has fallen." He read it once, twice, and then again. The words blurred as the snow fell heavier. He turned to his bannermen. "Call back the march. We head north, all of us. The war in the south is over. But what about the Lannisters? Lord Blackwood asked. Rob's eyes burned like frostbit steel. Let them have their throne. Let them bleed for it. We ride to face the real enemy now. And so the River Lords rode. Stark, Tully, Mallister, Blackwood. Not for power, but for the realm itself. In the vale, Lysa Arryn clutched a letter from Littlefinger with trembling hands. The words were poison. The North is weak. The dead rise. You must choose who survives. Send men to the Lannisters, or you will be forgotten. But her master brought another letter that night, this one from Sansa Stark, smuggled from King's Landing. Mother is gone. Arya too. Father lives. Robb lives. We fight for life, not thrones. Don't let Petyr lie to you. Not again. And, for once, Lysa Arryn hesitated. The Vale, silent and proud for so long, began to stir at Eastwatch by the sea. Jon Snow stood on the broken rampart, dragonglass sword drawn. Tormund Jonspan stood beside him, face painted in blood. The free folk had become his brothers now. The wall was behind them, no longer it had fallen. He had less than 200 men. None rested, none asked to dot. In the distance, they heard it, a horn, not one, not two, 3 blasts. The dead, they came like a wave, pale blue-eyed, relentless. And at their center, on a monstrous undead elk, rode the Night King himself, smiling and cold as oblivion. Jon didn't flinch. We hold the line. Tormund laughed. And if we fall, then we fall together. But they didn't fall that day, because just as the battle began torches flaring, steel clashing against frozen bone, the horns of House Stark answered from the hills behind Eastwatch. Ned Stark led his cavalry down the ridge, snow churning beneath hooves. With him came the Mormonts, the Glovers, the last of the North's strength. Robb's army thundered from the west. The River Lords charged in formation, spears raised, and Arya ghost-like and unannounced slipped through the dark like death itself. Daggers drawn, face hidden beneath shadows. For a moment, the undead faltered, and for the first time in generations, the living stood united. The battle was chaos, blood and ice, flame and frost. Whites exploded beneath dragonglass. Giants fell, with arrows through their eyes. Jon clashed blade to blade with the Night King himself, fury burning in every swing. And when the Night King raised his hand to call the dead, once more Ned Stark was there. He didn't hesitate. He drove a Valyrian steel blade, taken long ago, from the crypts of Winterfell into the monster's chest. The Night King screamed a sound like cracking mountains and shattered. Into shards of ice the whites froze mid-step. Then fell. The silence that followed was not peace, it was shock. They had won. For now Jon dropped to his knees beside Ned, bleeding and exhausted. You saved us. Ned shook his head. No, you did. In that moment, no throne mattered. No crown held power, just family, blood, the living. And in the snow, Arya looked up toward the rising sun, its light finally breaking through the storm. The war for the North had ended. The war for life had just begun.